I was a little bit more reluctant with ADHD meds. It's a stimulant, and like that was something that I used a lot. So I was a little worried about feeling like I was on drugs. Like I like being sober. I don't want to feel like I'm on drugs. And it turns out I don't feel like I'm on drugs at all.
Yeah.
Treating my ADHD helps me. It just takes the edge off of the things that are related to ADHD so that my recovery is a lot more in focus.
Traveling through life with ADHD can be unpredictable. It sometimes feels like trying to read a map that's written in a code you can almost, but not quite, crack. It can get tiring. So I've often fantasized about finding the perfect ADHD path, a smooth way of moving through the world, no snags, no stress. But of course, it's not that simple. It never is. Because if we're being honest, that route has a name. It's the path of least resistance. And I'm sensible enough to know that that path isn't really the one that leads to happiness. In reality, the road to finding your ADHD place in the world is twisty and brambly and tough. So when I find someone with ADHD, a person who seems to have built a world that works for them, I get nosy. What was the journey like? How did they get there? Elaine O'Brien is one of those people. Elaine has that ineffable thing, a mix of being obviously cool and obviously kind. The sort of thing that makes you think, I want to know that person. I met her on my first day of class at the community yoga center she runs in our bustling Queens neighborhood. I've made various attempts to do yoga over the years, and for the most part, any questions I have usually run along a pretty predictable line. Is this over yet? How did she get her leg to do that? What are the chances I'll actually remember to cancel my membership after I inevitably stop coming? But in Elaine's cozy studio, I felt calm, happy to be there even. She has a way of teaching that feels knowable. Cheesy, I know, but in her classes, I never feel lost or out of step. It's refreshing. A tiny escape before going back into a world that's basically the opposite. After that first day, we started chatting, and the conversation wound around ADHD. I have ADHD, she said, open, thoughtful, and happy to talk about it. A mode I've come to learn 2 years in is simply who she is. And still, when I visit the lovely, soft world that Elaine has made for herself and her community, which, remarkably, I have kept doing, a first, I wonder how she managed to build it, this tiny universe that seems so right for her brain. What stops and swerves and setbacks did she meet along the way, and how does she make it work? And yes, fine, I'm only human. How does she manage to speak normally while doing a headstand? So I asked. I'm Ray Jacobson, and this is Hyperfocus. Today on the show, Elaine O'Brien. Hi.
Hi, Ray.
This is so fun to see you in, not yoga pants.
I know. When you mentioned that earlier, I was like, you know what? She's right. Except I'd see you on the street once in a while, but I'll run into you or just see you across the street with your kid or something, and you're like in an outfit. And it's great.
So can I ask you a little bit about how you came to get diagnosed? Because you got diagnosed pretty late, right? It's a pretty recent diagnosis.
Well, yes, and also no. So I was actually technically diagnosed when I was in high school.
Oh.
But I kind of abandoned that diagnosis until, yes, a couple years ago, I was in therapy and, speaking to my therapist about some, I was basically talking about how I absolutely had to go running. This was a thing that has definitely helped me focus, but I was a little annoyed in that moment that, no matter what else was going on, no matter what else I wanted to do that day, even if I was tired, I just thought if I don't run around outside, I kind of thought of myself like a horse or something. It's just you got to go outside and run until you get that part done. And then you can move on and do the other priorities. But, then I was explaining that to her, and then she was like, continue, tell me more. And, I don't remember what I said, but I explained a little bit about the feelings I had, that, I'm sure signaled to her that I have ADHD, and she said, you might want to look into this. And I told her I'd been diagnosed when I was a kid, but I did not think it was relevant as an adult. I thought that it was one of those, I was a teenager in the 90s, and it was very common for people to be medicated for ADHD then. And I was medicated for a period of time. And then true ADHD person, I couldn't maintain my own like kind of plan of care. It just wasn't something I could do in college. And so I just stopped taking it, and I never, got any other like tools around that at all. So I kind of forgot.
When you said that you rejected it in high school, what do you mean?
This is, I think it's important for me, and obviously this is my situation, not everybody's, but, I've been in recovery, like 12-step recovery for a long time. And my introduction to recognizing that I had ADHD was when, or maybe that I reacted well to stimulants, was because I was a drug seeking person in high school, not kind of, like absolutely a drug seeking person in high school. And my little brother, who had, I guess at the time they said Asperger's, but he has autism. He had ADHD meds, and I like just took some one day, and I was amazed as to how much more capable I felt in school. And I guess I must have told my parents that I had been like skimming my little brother's medications, which is not not good news for them, but they were, they accepted that. They had already been in that network of, doctors that treated people, with, autism, ADHD, whatever else. And so I saw somebody, they prescribed me some medication. I was on it for a time. It was helpful. And then, like I said, I wasn't really able to maintain my own treatment plan in college. I mean, that's when things really started to escalate, and being out on my own, I was definitely partying a lot, and just being also not an adult yet, and so I just fell off with that, and I guess in my early days of recovery, I kind of chalked that up to just one of those, like, just like a drug thing, like, just like, oh yeah, of course, like I'm going to like take Adderall. Like I would take anything you put in front of me. And so I never thought of it as having to actually do with how my brain like has always been, or that it was something that was like, like that I maybe should pursue as legitimate treatment.
So, a little bit about ADHD and substance use. There's a lot to unpack around addiction and ADHD, and every person's experience is different. But there are some facts that can give a little context to a complex subject. Around 15% of people with ADHD experience a substance use disorder at some point in their life, compared to about 5.5% of people who don't have ADHD. The why of all of this is complicated and still being studied, but we do know that drugs and alcohol temporarily provide a hit of dopamine, something our ADHD brains lack, and that factors like impulsivity and genetics play a role. Also, many people with undiagnosed ADHD end up self-medicating. It's a way to compensate for the differences in our brains. For me, it was smoking. The perfect combination of nicotine and fidgeting and a reason to escape from parties all rolled into one. I've quit now, but it wasn't easy. For Elaine, things were more serious. For a lot of folks I know with ADHD who are in recovery, if you're okay talking about it, you can say at any point. The medicine itself is a stimulant, it's controlled. And I know a lot of people who are in recovery who take it and say it makes it easier to stay sober because they can kind of manage their symptoms more effectively. And, one of the big pieces of ADHD that I feel like people kind of don't talk about is that it makes you more likely to have any like substance use issues. Mm-hmm. And it's something where I don't know that there's like you can tell me, what is it like to have ADHD in recovery and like kind of process that at the same time?
Well, it's another layer, and one of the kind of phrases that I've heard a lot that resonates with me in recovery is that one is like, I wish you a long and slow recovery, which means that you're always kind of unpacking, and recovering at a way that's like, you treat the acute issues. And then as things continue, as you continue to maintain, abstinence from drugs and alcohol, but also, in my case, like practice the sort of the program, you start to discover things that maybe are a little bit unexpected and sometimes like a couple layers down. It's like you're peeling away the layers of an onion. So, there's like the things that are obvious and overt. And then, as you continue on and put in my case, a couple of years down, new things or maybe unexpected things start to, show through. And so
Oh.
let's see, I just celebrated 18 years of recovery. And so I was probably like 16 years, I guess, when I began ADHD medication, or even became aware that I was possibly actually ADHD and not just, looking around for stimulants when I was a, teenager. I had already been in treatment for depression, which I had accepted that I have this other layer that I have to address. It's like, I'd had more than one depressive episode in sobriety, many before I got sober. I wasn't ready to play around anymore. I was pretty sure that if like, that depression was just a part of my chemistry, and that, being in treatment for depression is fine.
Yeah.
Being in treatment meaning like being in therapy indefinitely is fine. Like for me, I'm lucky. I respond really well to SSRIs, like, being on an antidepressant indefinitely, like it's okay. It's like, I want to live my life. I don't want to have to manage, do nothing but manage symptoms because I'm too stubborn or too, my ego is too big, and think that I have to be so like, like there's a, I don't know. Everyone's different, but like, I didn't want to engage in these, really significant health issues and treat them act as if I got treatment for them, that I was somehow compromising my recovery. Cause I know I'm not, but that said, I was a little bit more, reluctant with ADHD meds. It took me a little while to come around, not long, but I thought about it. I did think about it because, it's a stimulant, and like that was something that I used a lot. Now looking back, maybe for reasons that are a little more clear than they were at the time. But so I was a little worried about feeling like I was on drugs. Like, I like being sober. I don't want to feel like I'm on drugs. And turns out I don't feel like I'm on drugs at all.
Yeah.
Treating my ADHD helps me. It just takes the edge off of the things that are related to ADHD, so that my recovery is a lot more in focus, like anything else.
That makes so much sense to me. I've never been in recovery, but I have experience with drugs. And there were moments I remember when I was in high school when I would sort of like find something that worked for me that was fun. And I would think like, oh, this is how people feel all the time. This is how normal people feel, which was like the way that I conceived of things at that time, And now looking back, I can see that it was so like kind of what you're saying, like, you find something that like basically does what ADHD treatment does. And you take it and you're like, oh, okay, I feel better. But at the time it was the same thing. I just thought, well, this is drugs, and drugs are supposed to make you feel better. But it was like, everyone around me seemed high, and I was like, I just feel normal. Like, oh, this is what it's like to just like do all the things you need to do. Oh.
And that's kind of the distinction there. I think that like people who play around with drugs, like their appetite for it is somewhat limited. Whereas for me, it was like, oh, if I turn that little light switch on, it's like, I don't know when I stop, like
there's no end.
There's no end, and it's like the cravings were really so strong. It just seemed almost like, okay, it's like breathing. It's just like you would keep going, there were times where I was like, interesting how this like moment in an acid trip would make me feel like, oh yeah, I'm focused, I'm relaxed, I'm at ease, like before the the fireworks would start to go off or whatever, it was like, I was just sort of like where I felt like I was like, relaxed and at ease, and in a way that I think was probably closer to how I imagined other people.
You've been sober, you said 18 years, which is incredible. And like, just congratulations, that's amazing.
Thanks.
But also, when did you get into like exercise and dance and yoga, and like, when did you start practicing this sort of like mindfulness exercise piece? And where in your recovery did that step in?
I've always been physical. I'd always gotten a lot of ease out of being physical. I used to, as a kid, going to basketball practice was like oh, it was like the best feeling, like whatever had happened that day that was frustrating or upsetting, I would forget about it for that hour that I was just playing basketball. And I would be shocked when I would return to the bad mood, as soon as it was over or whatever.
Yeah.
But the relief was really clear. And so that's always been something I've been attracted to. And I was also, as a teenager, really into performance, really into theater. That was what I pursued in college and what I actually continued to do for a lot of my adult life. But even before recovery, I would use definitely self-soothe with exercise. And, I don't know, maybe it was like, body shame or something that kind of like launched me into it, or trying to meet some sort of physical standard. But it definitely was well beyond that. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm like staying fit so that I could be attractive or something. It was like, it was clear to me that it was doing something for my brain. And it was also very obvious to me, to my dismay, that like I could not work in a sit down and type kind of environment.
Yeah.
I would just fall asleep.
You fall asleep?
Fall asleep. I had jobs in college where I was sitting, and it's just like this is how it was at the time, and maybe now I'm a lot more balanced. My energy is a lot less like up and down, but it felt like if I wasn't in constant motion, I was going to just like completely pass out. So anything that related to doing something, you usually needed to be physical. I always worked in restaurants and cafes in, my 20s. Exactly.
Yeah.
If you wanted me to work in a office, it was like, nap time. I was not going to make it. And then, and I did okay with that. I was not, obviously not always great, but sometimes fine. And then when I got sober, and the whole time I was doing performance stuff, theater, some dancing. And then, when I got sober, I guess maybe a couple months into it, and I've been running most of my adult life. I kind of just like forced myself to go to a yoga class because it seemed like people who did yoga were calm and that they enjoyed their time, and I was just like, I'll try anything. I mean, I was just really raw, really vulnerable. I went in and I tried it, and I went into an Ashtanga yoga class, which is, for people who know Ashtanga yoga, it's very, very rigorous and very, like codified. Like you do the same thing every time, repeat. And it's pretty weird and very, just very demanding. And there's something about the demanding physical practice that was repetitive, that got me in a routine, and it got me in my body, and I started to feel good. I really started to feel good. And for the first time in my life, in a way that was completely different from how, one would feel good when they were using drugs. I felt relaxed and at ease and, like connected to the world. I did a teacher training. I started teaching right away and just kept doing that. Yeah.
It just fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a person who does not like to exercise, can you tell? It pains me to say this, but exercise has been broadly and consistently found to help reduce symptoms of ADHD and improve mental health. Researchers think this is because exercise affects dopamine levels in the brain. Dopamine is a chemical that helps regulate memory, motivation, learning, pleasure. It does a lot, and people with ADHD don't have enough of it. ADHD medications partially work by boosting the amount of dopamine in the brain, and exercise has a similar, if smaller, effect. It helps you feel better and makes ADHD symptoms less intense. Interestingly, yoga has been found to be extra helpful for ADHD because it combines physical activity and mindfulness techniques, which can help calm the racing brain and make it easier to focus. The more you know. But I do want to know, because I'm genuinely curious about this, like on the days when I come to class, which I try to do as consistently as possible and often do not achieve, I feel better. And, there is a lot of evidence that exercise and mindfulness are helpful for ADHD, like just managing symptoms, dealing with stress, kind of like helping, like you said, like you run, you feel better. You don't run, you don't feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But like doing what you do, because a lot of times you do the class with us, like you show us the positions, you're active, like you're very active all the time. So on top of this admin stuff, you have a job where you're basically, as far as I can tell, practicing exercise and mindfulness like 100% of the time. Didn't one of your family members say, like, isn't your job to help people calm down?
No, my family member said Elaine spends all of her time learning how to calm down. So it's like, I mean, it's for me as well as the class.
But you've noticed, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, this job that you have is basically like something that a lot of us use to treat ADHD. Like we come to, or like I come to yoga because it helps me manage my own brain. It makes me feel better and I can sort of like get through my day in a different kind of way than I can if I don't. And it's noticeable. Have you noticed that like that equilibrium that you found in your life, all of these things is that supported by the actual physical kind of work that you do?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me, like movement and mindfulness, breathing, tending to my breath are all like vehicles for attention. And so I can't access that attention as easily as like, say, like, you know, I love to read, but my husband has the capacity to read for like hours.
Yeah.
I will only be able to read an hour if I've already put in the like physical time, you know, like moving my body. It prepares me. It prepares me for like whatever else I want to do. And, you know, and it is like, you know, I do put a lot of time into that. But it, you know, I guess like to the theme of just like, this is my brain. This is how my brain and my body interact, and I have to accept it. And, you know, I'm lucky. If that's what it takes to feel well, fine. I'm grateful to have those tools at hand. Really grateful.
Well, I'm very grateful for you passing them along and
Thank
very
you.
grateful for you coming on the show today. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Ray. This is so fun. It was so fun to talk to you.
It was so fun. And we're wearing normal clothes.
I know.
Thrill. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hyperfocus. If you have any questions or ideas for future topics, write me an email or send a voice memo to hyperfocus@understood.org. Hyperfocus is made by me, Ray Jacobson, and Cody Nelson. Our video producer is Calvin Knee. Our music comes from Blue Dot Sessions, and Justin D. Wright mixes the show. Ash Beecher is our supervising producer, Brianna Berry is our production director, and Neil Drumming is our editorial director. This show is brought to you by understood.org. Our executive directors are Laura Key, Scott Koshier, and Seth Melnick. Understood is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with learning and thinking differences like ADHD and dyslexia. If you want to help us continue this work, you can donate at understood.org/give.